Well, hello there, gunfighters. Hope you're having a nice day, whatever time it is, whenever you listen to this. Is going cheap worth it? Does it make sense to go cheap on guns? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hopefully that intrigues you. If this is not your first rodeo here and you're back for more, if you wouldn't mind scrolling down and hitting a like, subscribe, follow, or some stars, or even a rating. I don't know how all this works, to be honest with you, but they say that helps other people find the podcast. And if you liked it, maybe you want to help other men that might enjoy it as well. With that, I'll put in the bio, and then we'll get into the main topic. I'll roll into a quick abbreviated bio and then into the main topic. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life. I grew up hunting and fishing in the backwoods of the southeastern United States at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with firearms. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. By God's grace, He got me through that safely. After that, I served as an instructor. An urban warfare instructor and a desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I also served with the LAPD, both full-time as a sworn police officer and some more specialized assignments, as well as serving in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard. I've been a FBI firearms instructor, still am an FBI firearms instructor, have been for a lot of years. Also NRA certified and some other three-letter government agency certified. I've been a private contractor for a three-letter government agency I won't specify. I've been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. By God's grace, He got me through all that in one piece, not because I'm better, but because He chose to have grace and mercy on me. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professionally hunted things like buffalo and elk. Not many people today can say they've done that, but I'm blessed to be able to say that I have. I've hunted everything from white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast to gray squirrel on the East Coast to prairie dog on the West Coast and elk and bear and wolf and slain all manner of beast. A state rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different disciplines. Now those experiences, it's not because I'm bigger or badder. Certainly not bigger. In fact, I met one of the patrons in real life, and he said something to the effect of, "I thought you'd be bigger." Reminded me of that William Wallace movie, where he's like, "Oh yeah, if William Wallace were here, he'd shoot lightning bolts out of his rear end." Well, I'm not William Wallace, but I am the person that did all those things in the bio. But not because I'm bigger or badder. I don't think that I survived when many other young good men did not. I give all the glory and all the credit to God, all the talents and experiences that He's given me and the things that He's let me live through. I hope to use them to glorify God and to help you today. So if I boast in anything, it's not in my strength, it's in that God had mercy on me and saved me because He had a purpose for me. And hopefully I can use those talent, skills, and abilities to serve you today. So, does it make sense to go cheap? Of course, you probably know I'm going to say it depends. What is this thing for? What is this gun for? What is this equipment for? First, you must ask, is the very best version of this thing, is it overpriced? Maybe the answer is yes. Maybe the answer is no. Are you paying for, let's say, name recognition, brand recognition? If that's the case, and you don't care about the brand recognition, and some people do, some people are super brand loyal. If you care about the brand recognition, then you got to pay for the name. If you don't care, and it's pretty well established that another brand is as good, not somebody wants it to be as good or it's a copy of it, but it is as good, but doesn't have the brand recognition, sometimes you can save money that way. And there are very few, I think, if any, gun companies that are overpriced. for stuff. Good guns cost good money. Some of them may not be worth it to you, and we'll get into that later, but if the good version of the gun is not in and of itself just overpriced, they don't just tack another 100 on it just for the heck of it. Right? If it's not overpriced like that, they're not just price gouging you, then if you want a cheaper version, what are you giving up on? Oh, you are giving up on the name, but you might not care about that. A big place that many companies cut corners is they use slave labor. Yeah, they use slave labor. So you could cut corners there. The issue with that is, yeah, some malnourished kid in the third world could do that job, but are they going to do it as well as a trained actual machinist in a Western country that's been trained and knows what he's doing and cares about what he's doing and supports his family, is making a livable wage, rather than the slave that's forced to do it, has really no idea what he's making, how it interacts with anything. He's just told, make X amount of widgets per hour or else. Right? Which one of those do you think is going to turn out a better product? Now, a lot of new gun manufacturing, I'll be honest, has been emphasized on interchangeability of parts and ease of manufacture, and so you do see a lot of cheap knockoff guns made in third world countries with slave labor. Or if not slave labor, much cheaper labor than you would pay an American or a German or an Austrian or a Belgian. These are all places where like the best guns in the world are made. Colt, Staccato, Fabrique Nationale, FN, H&K. You get the idea. Now, a big place they cut costs is, let's make it in Turkey, let's make it in China. But again, are those people making it to the same quality? I'm going to let you answer that one for yourself. Another place one could cut cost is with materials. And this may make a lot of sense to you. You may not care. If you are familiar with really high-end 1911s, you may be familiar with Cabot. Cabot makes some of the most beautiful, exquisite 1911s that have ever been made by human hands. They are exquisite. They are not overpriced, I think. They are thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. But a big part of that is the materials. They might use something like meteorite or Damascus or mammoth tooth. And that's really cool and beautiful, and I think their guns are probably absolutely worth the money. But this is gunfighter life. I've been a professional gunfighter most of my adult life. I think mammoth tooth is beautiful. I think the Damascus stuff is gorgeous. However, that doesn't make it function any better than, let's say, a comparable quality with lacking those materials. So, probably something made as functionally well would be a Wilson Combat or a Nighthawk Custom. They're still not cheap guns, but they're probably way more affordable than a Cabot. And for me, I don't care about that material. I like it. I appreciate it for the work of art that it is. But if I have to change somebody's behavior with that handgun, it's not going to make a difference whether it was mammoth tooth or G10 or micarta. Right? G10 or micarta are going to work just fine for grips from my 1911. So sometimes you can write that off and say, no, I don't care about that. I'm a big fan of stainless. I operate in some pretty harsh environments. If I can take it, my gun should be able to take it. But maybe you live and pretty much stay in West Texas or Arizona and you don't really care about stainless steel guns because the stuff doesn't rust really like it does in South Georgia on the coast. So that's a place where maybe the stainless steel one costs $100 more, but you don't care because, it's unlikely that the gun, even if you neglect it, is going to rust in the Sonoran Desert. So maybe you can save some money on not going stainless if you don't need stainless. Whereas me, you might know if you listen, I live as a neo-nomad. I go all over, a stranger and a pilgrim on the earth. I might be in the rainforest of Alaska. Right now I'm in northern Idaho, Montana, Canada kind of section. It's cold and wet and really harsh conditions outside. I want stainless. You may not care about stainless. Talking about cutting cost on materials. A big one you'll see in ARs. What I would call a decent, like gunfighter grade AR is going to have some kind of really good friction and corrosion reduction mechanism in the chamber and the bore. Now that might be nitride, QPQ, like a really good nitride, I think is absolutely fine. But the classic gold standard for that is like chrome lined hammer forged barrel with a chrome chamber and a chrome bore. Why does that matter? Well, if it's just a home defense gun that you keep clean at home, and that's your home defense carbine, and you're probably not going to do mag dumps through it, then yeah, you probably don't need a chrome lined barrel if you're going to keep it clean and take it to the range and shoot 3 or 4 rounds to make sure it's zeroed every 6 months. To be honest, you probably don't want a cold hammer forged barrel. It probably doesn't, well, not that you don't want it, but you probably don't need to pay for it. If you're going to use it in nasty conditions, keep a round chambered in there, and salt and dust and dirt and grime can get in there, and it gets stuck in the chamber and rips off your extractor. Yet saving some money on non-chrome lining was not worth it for you, right? That was a bad trade-off. Whereas if it's your carbine for home defense, it's not going to be your grab-and-go apocalypse gun or anything. You know, a non-chrome lined barrel probably do you just fine. Also, barrel life. If you're actually going to go out and train with it, and let's say take a carbine class where you shoot 2,000 rounds in a week, the paying the extra money for the chrome lining or really good nitriding is absolutely going to pay for itself, because if not, you're going to have to change the gun out quicker because you're going to wear it out. A chrome lined barrel is going to last far, far longer, thousands and thousands of rounds longer than a non-chrome lined barrel. So if you're actually going to run it hard, absolutely it's worth it to step up to a chrome lined barrel. Again, if it's just a home defense carbine with a red dot that you're going to shoot and make sure it's clean and store it clean, it would probably take you several lifetimes to wear out that barrel. But if you're actually going to run and gun, train with it, take it to competition, go to training classes, whatever, yeah, it's definitely worth it to get a chrome lined barrel, or again, nitride QPQ, quench, polish, quench. You can research that if you want, right? Is it worth it? Well, that depends on you. Maybe for you, no. Another real common one, I think that gets cut cornered, is quality control. And does this matter to you? I mean, that's kind of a roll of the dice. Are you a gambler? Is Kenny Rogers, is that song your favorite country song? If you're a gambler, then you might roll the dice and go with a company with less than adequate quality control. Because maybe you get a good one. Maybe you get a gun that's just as good. Like, here's a classic example. I don't take any sponsors here, and I'll say names. Maybe you get a Taurus revolver that is as good as a Smith & Wesson revolver, because they're pretty much copies of it, right? The patents on those things have expired. They're mostly copies. Maybe you get a Taurus revolver that's as good, and every part in there doesn't have any weaknesses in the material, and it's as good, and you got it for significantly less money. Well, score. You won. You rolled the dice, and I don't know. I don't gamble, but you got whatever is great for your game. You rolled the winning dice. However, maybe you don't. And again, it depends on you. Maybe you don't care. Maybe it's not a core gun. Maybe you just want a giant 44 Magnum. And if it breaks, you send it back to Taurus and they fix it. And if it breaks, you send it back to Taurus and they fix it again. It's not going to be, a survival gun. It's not going to be an apocalypse gun. It's not going to be a defense gun. You're not going to carry it if a bear's trying to eat your face. It's just a for fun gun because you want to go to the range and blast 44 Magnum or whatever obnoxious caliber you want. But here's the deal. Is the Smith & Wesson overpriced? Absolutely not. because they have really good quality control. And all guns can break, but they probably have a far less chance of the small parts inside that gun breaking, coming out of time, snapping because of imperfection in the steel and the metallurgy, because they have higher quality control. And that's really, I think, been a thing that Taurus, Rossi, and them have struggled with for decades, is they can make some really good guns. They can also make some absolutely subpar guns that I wouldn't want to trust my life to. So again, do you just want to roll the dice? That really depends on you. I don't think a Smith & Wesson revolver is overpriced. So you got to be real. If you think that you're getting a gun just as good for way cheaper money, only if the dice lands the right way and every single minute part, the cranes, the lifters, the springs, all that stuff holds up to punishment. You get the one where it's got a little imperfection or air bubble in that MIM part, metal injection molding, and that's the one that breaks. And people say revolvers don't malfunction. Well, that's garbage. Revolvers absolutely malfunction and break, and when they do, it's often catastrophic. If semi-auto malfunctions, a lot of times you can fix it with clearing the malfunction. If a revolver malfunctions, a lot of times, like, you're not fixing it in the field. You have a club at that point. So again, is it worth it? I don't know. What are you doing with it? Are you, again, just going to the range to turn money into noise? Then yeah, it'll work fine. And here's a big one. You see a lot of these cheap Turkish clones. If you want to give money to support Muslims making guns, that's something you got to wrestle with for yourself. And forget how they treat their workers or whatever. If you put all that aside, they absolutely make a lot of cheap versions of, let's say, more expensive guns. And if we take all the human element out of it and just look at the machine itself, okay, do I think an FN high power is overpriced? No, I don't. So if you get a Turkish clone, whatever, they got a bunch of different names. Who knows if they're made in the same factory, different factories, I don't know. If you get the Turkish clone of a Browning high power, are you getting a Browning high power? Are you getting something that looks like a Browning high power? You're getting something that will have a manual of arms like a Browning high power. But is it reliable? Will it function? Will it break? Again, roll the dice. And again, what's it for? If you just take the human element out of it and look at the machine element, it may absolutely make sense to go cheap on those. Let's say that you want to be a firearms instructor and you just want a basic version of many different kinds of guns, right? So your students can try and train with many different kinds of guns. So it's not going to be your core, it's not going to be your carry gun, you're not going to trust your life to it, it's just for demonstration purposes. And you want a Browning high power because it's a classic. You want a cheap 1911, you want a cheap CZ75 clone. You don't care if it breaks. If it breaks, you send it back, they fix it. If you're out of it for 6 weeks, it's not a big deal to you. Then does it make sense just from the machine element to go cheap on that? Yeah, probably, because who cares if it breaks? Who cares if it, has a double feed every magazine? Does that matter? Not if it's for instructional purposes and you're teaching classes and teaching how to clear malfunctions anyway. And part of that class is just familiarization fire, FAM fire, and just say, hey, students, you ever wanted to shoot a 1911? Here you go. You ever want to shoot a Browning high power? Here you go. You ever want to shoot a medium frame 38 special revolver? Here you go. All cheap knockoffs. But they'll get the idea of what it's like to run a revolver. Another place that you might be able to cut corners is fit and finish. As long as it's not on a non-crucial part, right? The Russians are kind of famous for this. Their guns are crude looking. They're downright homely, but they run. And I'm not real hip on Soviet handguns, but you got to admit they made some fine rifles. You got to give it to the commies for making really good rifles, right? A Mosin Nagant might be ugly. It might have machine marks on it. It might have the fit and finish of a preschooler's crayon drawing. But, man, it'll probably run, right? I mean, come on, you got to give it to those guys. So they cut, I think the Russians are kind of famous, right? They cut corners where it doesn't matter. Do you care if there's machine marks on the outside of the barrel? I mean, you might, but if you're talking about a functionality standpoint, who cares? A big one you may notice, even on like the older military Colt AR-15s and military M16s and stuff, like the anodizing on the upper and the lowers may not match. Who cares, right? It has nothing to do with the functionality of the gun. Whether they're a different shade of blue, gray, whatever color, that you just because they change the whatever ratio from this batch to that batch on the lowers for the anodizing. Does that matter? No, absolutely not. Aluminum doesn't rust anyway, right? So does that matter? It doesn't matter. Again, that's a place where you might find something that cuts corners, but doesn't matter to you at all because all you care about is form and function. The finish can be important for like abrasion resistance, longevity of the gun. We talked about chrome lining, we talked about nitriding, and that all has to do with function. But you know how hydro dipping is big now, how they put like camo patterns on stocks. If they messed up on that and they dipped it wrong and it's got a big run in the stock and you can get it for 20% off, do you care? I wouldn't care. It's like camo to me is just a rough thing to break up my outline. If you want it to be Gucci flage and like look pristine and like I want my mossy oak boots to match my mossy oak pants to match my mossy oak jacket to match my mossy oak stock, and it's all got to look pristine because I'm going to put it on in the gram, right? Maybe you do care about that, but from a function standpoint, it doesn't matter. I don't think that giant Tom Turkey is going to be like, wait a second. I almost got shot, but there was a run in that stock, and that camo pattern is slightly asymmetrical, and now I'm running away, right? It doesn't matter for that. So that's another place you might be able to cut costs, or sometimes you can even like from the factory blemish models. You can find those, then have at it. So sometimes you can cut corners on like finish and machining and stuff on places where it doesn't matter. Inside a chamber, machining absolutely matters. Absolutely, you don't want machine marks, right? But on the outside of the barrel, does it really matter if there's machine marks? Probably not. And heretofore, we've mostly discussed like new-ish guns. I mean, I know we mentioned like the Mosin and Gant, but that was just for an example. But absolutely used guns, you can really score on going cheap. A lot of times those are great values. And guns, if it's made well in the first place, not if it was cheaply made in the first place, but it was made well in the first place, it'll often be designed to last for generations. And I would rather have a used good gun than a new cheap gun. Like there's a lot of really good police trade-in mid-size, medium frame revolvers on the market where the bluing is wore off on the barrel. But, I mean, I'm going to use that gun if I buy it. So would I care? No. I would much rather have a used police trade-in Smith & Wesson mid-frame revolver than a brand new Taurus. So if I was going to cut price, I would cut it that way. I would look for a used police one because I know most cops don't shoot that much, and that thing could probably stand up for generations of police use. And yeah, it's probably got wearing on the bluing where it wore off the cylinder and the end of the barrel and the holster, but as long as the inside of the barrel is fine, and as long as it's not out of time or something, all the parts in there are probably still really good quality. So you can totally cheat the equation that way. And another way, a big way, talked about this in the Patreon chat today, which you would know if you were in the Patreon chat. Thank you, all the patrons who support the show. We're talking about surplus. Surplus is absolutely a way to cheat the price value ratio algebraic equation, right? You can totally cheat on that because the market gets flooded and supply and demand works in your favor, and there's a ton of them, and people think that they're cheap, so they must not be that good, but they're absolutely good. The one that came up in the chat and absolutely is a great gun is the SKS. Most of them. And by most I mean like the Russian and the Chinese SKSs. absolutely, even they were crazy good deals when they were $100 and something. They're still a good deal at $400 or $500. Think about a gun of that quality, semi-auto, crazy reliable, as long as it's not been Bubba-ized or redneck-ized and made to take some detachable magazine, as long as it's the way that it was, like original military issue. What other actual battlefield rifle, military grade, small arm, semi-automatic, rock solid, reliable, with a really, really good intermediate cartridge, did I mention reliable, that can you get for $500? I'll wait. Right? They're absolutely undervalued. If they were $1,000, I still think they'd be undervalued. Because it takes about $1,000 to get pretty much any other military grade, actual issued for military combat use gun like that. Look at what a decent condition M1 carbine costs, right? Look at what a good condition M1 Garand cost. So those are absolutely a good value. With the caveat, if that's what you want. If you have no use for an SKS and you spent $500 on an SKS, maybe it's a good investment, but you get what I'm saying. But absolutely, I think undervalued, and you can absolutely go cheap sometimes if it's surplus. If it's surplus junk, then it's still junk. But a lot of people like knock the Chinese stuff. Like, there's a difference between, and don't think that the Chinese are fools, right? They might make cheap junk for us to get our money, but when it comes to arming their own army to protect their own nation, their small arms are pretty good, right? So I think a lot of people think, oh, Chinese cheap. Well, Chinese cheap if it's made for you, but those weren't made for us. They were made for China. And when China got rid of them, we happened to acquire them. But absolutely, surplus can be a way to go cheap and still get a really, really, really good weapon. And sadly, if you think about it, many of the military small arms after the SKS are going to be banned, right, for the U.S., unless we have some crazy law change, which would be awesome. But most of the ones after that were full auto. Like most of what you would call an AK here in the U.S., that's not an AK. Unless you have an actual, like, NOM, bring back full auto, class 3 weapon that's an actual AK, you don't have an AK. You have something that was pieced together to sell to the American market, probably. And again, quality control is a big deal there. How did they put it together? Did they know what they were doing when they were doing the rivets, or was it some to the cheapest bidder, slave labor person putting the rivets in? So most of the ones after the SKS, because they went to full auto or select fire, most of those weapons, they just can't be imported in their original configuration. Some of them have been redone really well, but again, if you want a really, really good, in my opinion, reliable AK quality, but not an actual AK gun, you're talking about an Arsenal AK, you're talking about an IWI Galil, and those are well upwards of $1,000. And you look at the SKS for, $300, $400, $500, you're like, yeah, that's absolutely, that's a cheap gun and a really good gun. So, is cheap worth it? Now, that really depends. And the big, obvious elephant in the room here is if you have the money, right? You put yourself in debt, like running up a credit card, any kind of debt, you're a slave, or at best, an indentured servant. A servant of somebody else. So, budget's a big one, right? What can you afford? And you got to factor training and ammo into that, too. You're almost certainly going to be more effective, as much as I rag on Glock sometimes for having the ergonomics of a 2x4 and the trigger like chewing on sand, right? You're probably better off, honestly, with a used Glock you got that was all beat up and a couple of cases of ammo and actually going and taking a training class than getting a really high-end 1911 and not affording the training class and not affording the ammo to go out and train. You got to factor all that in. Is it worth it? Is that high-end 1911 a better gun? Absolutely. That's not the only factor in that equation. You there, gunfighter, factor into that equation. Despite what, hoplophobia is the fear of weapons. I think it afflicts many in our society today. Despite what a hoplophobe might say, that gun's not going to hurt anybody, right? That gun's not going to be violent on its own. That gun's not going to be dangerous on its own. You could set that 1911 on a table, the best 1911 in the world. You set that on that table, it would rot into oblivion before it ever did anything useful without somebody operating it. So the gun is only part of it. Yet to be a gunfighter, you need to have a gun. Right? But you also, there's a lot more that goes into it than that. So there's a lot of factors. Is cheap worth it? I don't know. Is it worth it for you? It's a question I cannot answer for you without information. Tactical tip of the day for threaded barrels. Even if you're not going to run a suppressor on them, if you're not going to run a compensator on the gun and it has a threaded barrel, here's something you may want to do. Mostly to protect the crown of that barrel. I like threaded barrels for just such a thing. The crown, where the bullet exits the barrel, the concentricity of those lands and grooves of that rifling is important for accuracy. So you want to protect it. Having a little bit of overhang from that thread protector can do that. Now, obviously, if you just back it off, it's going to be loose. So what you can do is take a rubber washer or some kind of rubber or Teflon O-ring of the appropriate size and put one or two in there and then finger tighten that thread protector, and it should give you a handsome gap between the end of that thread protector and the start of the crown of that gun, which can greatly aid in protecting the muzzle of that gun when you're doing, pretty robust stuff with the gun. Dropping it, beating it into stuff. So, again, real quick, if you got a threaded barrel and you're not going to run a can on it, you're not going to run a compensator or something on it, just take the thread protector off, put a rubber washer or O-ring on there, and put the thread protector back on. That way you get a little bit of overhang on that thread protector to protect the end of the barrel. That's your tactical tip of the day, your tactical verse of the day. This is from Job chapter 42. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do all things, and that no plan is impossible for you. Do you believe that? Do you believe that God Almighty exists and that He can do anything? For it is written, he who comes to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. I believe that. I hope, men, that you believe it too.